This is The Toss-Up, where we take a look at some of the topics facing the world of college sports and give a little bit of the history behind some of them. We're not trying to change your mind. We just want to dive deeper into the topics that keep you tuned in to the teams you love. It's the end of the college football season, and many schools, including Indiana, prepare to head to a bowl game. But for some schools, they welcome in a new head coach. Louisiana State, Texas, Baylor, Purdue all made the change before the end of the season. It almost makes you wonder why schools try to get ahead of the coaching carousel. Some schools with new head coaches this season did not improve. The University of Georgia fired a coach who averaged 9 wins each season he was in Athens, including 2015, but the program will settle for at best an 8-win season under new head coach Kirby Smart, and that's if they win their bowl game. A study by Sid Sosa-Nixon published in the Journal of Sport and Social Issues in 2012 examined athletic program status and coaching salaries. That study found that over the 5 years of the study, the salary of the coach had little to no effect on the team's appearance in the top 25 in basketball or football. Only 5 of the highest paid coaches in football and 3 in basketball remained in the top 25 over the course of the study. And those schools are actually what we might consider the elite in their respective sports, such as Louisiana State and Ohio State in football and Kansas in basketball. Joining me on the panel this week is Griffin Weinberg, Lydia Nall, who's been on the panel with us before, and a new addition, Mr. Eddie Cotton, who is one of the sports directors for WIUX Student Radio at Indiana University. I'm going to start with you, Eddie. What's some of your impressions about when schools get rid of coaches early, sort of early, or even during the season?
I think a lot of what has to do with how the coaching carousel works is the pressure of it all. There is a remarkable amount of pressure to earn money and earn revenue for your program, and because of that, a lot of schools make decisions too early that are clearly too drastic. A lot of programs take time to build. You're looking at schools and coaches that need 4 to 5 years to bring in recruiting classes, develop their players, develop their system, and there are programs out there making decisions 3 or 4 years into a coaching reign that really can harm where the program is going, because then you have to bring in a new guy that has to do the exact same thing, take his 3 to 4 years to rebuild, and it seems like there's just a lack of trust between athletic directors and the coaches they actually bring into their program, and it's created this system of a lack in loyalty and a lack of trust that's extremely frustrating from a fan's perspective of no matter what fan base you're a part of.
When we talk about if you look at the history of a lot of programs, you had coaches that stayed at schools 10, 15, 20, 30 years when you look at the history of college athletics. Do you have any idea why we don't see some of that tenure in college athletics now, Lydia?
I think like what Eddie said, it is that pressure, and they feel every year if something goes wrong or they did a little bit worse than last year, questions start to pop up like, is this going to be a trend? Is this the way we're headed? And they automatically think, because of maybe that lack of trust in the program and the coach, that it's going to continue down that same road, and they're not giving them enough time over those 6, 7, 8 years, however long it takes, to rebuild the program with the new recruiting classes, which takes 3 to 4 years in itself, as top of the players that you currently have. And so I think why we don't see that is athletic departments jump to the conclusion that this is a trend and this is automatically the coach's fault that has come in with the program starting right now, whereas they need the time in order to rebuild.
One of the things that inhibits a coach's ability to stay at a school is chatter. You know, a lot of times it depends on who the chatter is coming from. In a lot of cases, in the past at least, the chatter has come from the donors. Now we see a lot of chatter coming from social media. Do you think, Griffin, that social media plays as much of a part in the athletics decisions to keep coaches, or are these still some relatively internal decisions that these athletic departments are making?
Yeah, I don't think social media will play a big part. I mean, there's a bunch of fans obviously out there. They'll be talking and they'll say, oh, he's having such a bad year. Let's get him out of here. But I don't think that the athletic director or the rest of the athletic department is really thinking, oh, listen to some of the fans on Twitter and see what they have to say. Maybe they're actually smart about this kind of stuff. I don't think that it has to do with that. I think that it's all internal. They might like take some of the thoughts, and then if there's some ESPN people or some other big name writers out there in the AP that might be saying something about some of the coaches, they might take that into consideration, but I don't think that social media has a big part in this.
I think sometimes what you have to, when you talk about the trust and you talk about having a coach, stay at the school for a little bit of time, I think sometimes this mentality of grass is always greener gets a lot of programs in trouble. For example, what might work at Georgia Tech in basketball might not necessarily work at Indiana in basketball. Indiana is a stalwart. They have been a program that has been recognized and respected in basketball for years. Georgia Tech, not so much. So for Georgia Tech to fire a coach because he does, poorly in maybe 4 years, you don't know who your program is. Is that fair enough to say when it comes to trust, Eddie?
I think a lot of programs sort of just assume that we deserve to win, and they don't look at the history of their job. You can look at Indiana per se. There's not a strong history of winning with that program in football, to be specific, and yet there are still high expectations from a fan base. And you can't just assume that a guy can come in there and coach a program and completely turn it around and shift the direction of a program. When you see a program like Indiana or another program making slight progress year by year, that's big for them. And I think other schools need to adapt that understanding that you can't just win now. And that's what a lot of schools are jumping to, this thirst for being a big program. Not everyone can be a Michigan. Not everyone can be an Ohio State. Those are programs that have been developed for 30 years. And people can't just jump to those assumptions.
It's fair enough also to say that, everyone wants the program to win. But at what expense? Because one of the things that a lot of coaches a lot of athletic directors like to say, something that we've even heard within the past couple of weeks here at Indiana, is you want continuity. So what is one way to maintain continuity at your school, in your culture, if you're not going to keep the coaches around? Any suggestions on that, Griffin?
I mean, it's just success. You need to be able to have success from the team. That's pretty much all it is. You see a guy like Mack Brown, when he came to Texas, he was there for 16 years, I think it was. And he came in and he had immediate success. And I mean, there might have been a little bit of a slow start, but they eventually started to get a little bit better and won a national championship in 2005. The only reason Mack Brown left was because he decided to resign or retire, I guess. And that was just because in the waning years, the team was starting to get a little bit worse and he just wasn't so much into it. I think that when it comes to continuity, you need to find success in your team. And I think it really jumps off the point that Eddie was making, and Lydia especially, the fact that these teams, they want immediate success from the coaches right when they come in. And it's just not that easy because of recruiting. When you bring in a new head coach, they don't get their immediate recruiting class. They come in with the recruits that their former coach is making. Year 2, it's a mix of the old coaches' recruits and some of their new recruits. Year 3, that's when they should start to get their full recruiting class in and then potentially start to see some positive results. I think it should be a 3 to 4 year kind of plan for a head coach, but it's hard to find that continuity nowadays. It's just not going to happen.
So, Lydia, what would you say are some of the things that we should be looking for when it's time to possibly get rid of a coach?
I think, obviously, you have the big actual issues. Either there's a disagreement between faculty and the coaches from the get-go, and they don't agree on how they want to achieve success within the program. That's going to become a problem. If there's obviously allegations, you look to Baylor, for example, something like that, that's clearly an issue, not with the program, but with something even larger than the program. That's when a coach has to go. As far as success is concerned, I think we need to allow the coaches the longer period of time to stay. Like what Griffin was saying, it takes even 3 years for them to get their full recruiting class in. And once they have one class in, you still need to build up the next class and the next class. You're looking at 6 years before they have a team that they have built themselves. So I think that's a minimum that they should wait before they fire based on strictly success.
One of the continuing issues that faces college athletics is the perception of exploitation and money-hungry programs. And when you fire some coaches with these salaries and you're bringing in other coaches' salaries, you're still paying some of those old coaches as well. And you're talking about programs and schools that, only about 7 schools are making money. Isn't that one of the hidden crises of this whole coaching carousel?
I mean, if you look at some of the contracts that we have out there right now, Kirk Ferentz from Iowa, if he were fired tomorrow, he would make $25 million. You're looking at about 33 coaches right now that are coaching that if they got bought out tomorrow would make at least $8 million in just their buyout alone. And there are programs out there like Charlie Strong at Texas. They were willing to drop $11 million to get rid of him. At LSU, they were willing to drop over $10 million just to get rid of Les Miles, because athletic directors see the potential for revenue, and they see those potential huge numbers that a program like Michigan is bringing in after they brought in $88 million of revenue this year just from their football program alone. They see those numbers, and they're willing to buy those contracts out and spend that money now for what could be huge growth in the future. And it's kind of mind-blowing to look at it from those numbers perspective, but that's what athletic directors are seeing.
I think also, in addition to seeing that revenue come in, sometimes we forget that, the revenue that the football team makes, even if you're in North Carolina or in Indiana, for the most part, the revenue that the football team makes is where your bread and butter is coming from. That's how your department's going to make its money. And so when they do look at, as I was saying earlier, some of the grass is greener on the other side, how can these programs still remind their fan bases, hey, come out, support the team, support the program, even though we're not necessarily doing good on the field?
That's kind of when it's tough to talk about, because that's when you really need the dedicated fans to come in. And there aren't a lot of fan bases these days where they have those kinds of dedicated fans. You talk about Indiana, of course, for basketball, diehard Hoosier fans are always going to be there. Duke for basketball as well. Ohio State and Michigan for football, they have their dedicated fans. There just doesn't seem to be that kind of culture anymore. Now it seems like, going back to what we were talking about earlier, the fans want success right now. And if they don't get that, then they're going to stop paying attention to the team, or they're just going to start resenting them for whatever reason it may be. They just want the success now. It's hard to find, or it's hard to give a reason to keep the fans around if you're not going to have a good football program.
Any final thoughts on the coaching carousel? I do know, actually, for one thing, a program, when you talk about, for example, LSU, one good thing, that LSU has done, Texas did this year, you went ahead and got it over with before the season was over. Does that at all, because they're doing it, does that maybe help with some of the continuity issues that they might have and some of the cultural issues, or is it sort of a wash? What do you think?
Personally, I do not think firing the coach mid-season is acceptable. I don't think that should happen, especially based on something like success. I think that not only leaves the players and the entire program hanging, but it cuts off this coach midway through their work. And I think they need to be allowed the full season. Even if they've done bad the whole season, let them finish it out, and at the end of the season, they'll look at their record and realize, we didn't do so hot this season. But by cutting them off mid-season, now all these players, they're going to be discouraged to even play as hard as they have been. They don't have a coach. There's a bunch of questions in the air. Fans look at the program and say, the program's failing. They fired their coach. And that's, like you said, if you don't have those diehard fans, and even if you did, that's a huge issue for them looking at the program. They think it's automatically going downhill. Whereas if you wait to the end of the season, by the time the next season comes around, they've had a chance to rebuild the program, encourage the players again, and get back up on their feet.
Yeah, like you look at Les Miles for LSU last year. They were thinking about firing him after the season that they had because they just had an epic collapse. Like they went on a 3-game losing streak at the end of the season. They play the final game. They let the fans kind of decide what's going to happen. Les Miles wins that game, so they decide to keep him. In that instance, they should have just fired him instead, because they ended up firing him after, 3 or 4 games this season? Yeah. They should have just got rid of him after that. You look at Charlie Strong for Texas this year. There was a big speculation that he was going to be fired after the season, and then it said that he was fired after, with 1 game remaining. Then they had the game against TCU. Reports say that he's going to be reevaluated after that game for whatever that was going to mean. If Texas won that game, Charlie Strong might still be at Texas. And I think they made the right decision by firing him. You have to be able to make that decision right on the spot.
And when you fire a coach in the middle of the season, what does that do for the rest of the season? What does that do for the fans? Looking at LSU, after 4 games, you bring in Ed Orgeron, who people didn't even know would continue to be coach after the season was over, and they have all these question marks around the team. You've got players that have just lost their coach. They're probably considering transferring and looking at other schools and other options. It's like you've thrown away an entire season. And how can you develop when you're throwing away these games that LSU recently just did?
I think one thing, too, that sort of gets lost in the discussion, it's no secret that I follow Georgia Tech very closely. One of the things that made me angry, yes, you may laugh, one of the things that made me angry about when they fired Paul Hewitt was that he was hired to sort of move the school out of sanctions and to bring up the graduation rate and to bring up the academic standards of the school. So here's my question. At what point, since these are student athletes and we always want to say that, school comes first, at what point does academics become more important than wins?
I honestly, I don't know. When it comes to college football, I mean, I get it. You're in college, you're a student athlete. But I don't know if academics is really more important than getting wins in college football. I mean, it's probably not what you want to hear, but I think that's what everyone knows it. The coaches know it, the players know it. They go in with the mindset thinking, all right, I got to wake up at 7 o'clock. Let's get a lift in. Let's study the playbook. Let's watch film. Let's get all this done. All right, now I have a class. Now I have a test to study for. Who cares? Let's study for the game this weekend. I don't think that academics is ever going to be more important than getting wins. I'm sorry.
And I think as programs continue to build, as revenues continue to increase, that's only going to get worse. You look at it right now, but I don't see necessarily a turning point. I don't see at least in the near future, point that suddenly players would start to realize, maybe I should be focusing on my degree. Maybe I need to graduate before considering the draft, things like that. The way things are going, that's not going to happen.
When have you seen a coaching move made because, hey, he really cares about academics. He could bring our program to this new level. You've never seen that. It's always been about the wins and losses. That's what they always look at when they're making these hirings or these firings and these coaching moves. And I think we're at a point where there's no return. There's no going back and saying, hey, we really need to focus now on academics now. You're too far into this major revenue stream that is college football that there's nowhere to go.
Then I guess, go ahead, Griffin.
I was just going to say, I think the academics is really, most importantly, just for the players that aren't really getting that much time. If they can get the achievement at the end of the year, Big Ten All-Academic or something like that, that's really the only time when I think that academics is really going to overpower being having success on the field.
Then you have to be satisfied with whatever perception people give you. And the perception right now in college sports is, as we've said, academics don't matter. As true as false as it may be, that's the perception right now in academics. When, say a coach does good on the field, but his players may not do good in the classroom. And sometimes you do have the other side where, hey, they're all getting A's and graduating, but they can't win the game. I mean, you have to run with the perception that everyone gives you. And you can't say on one hand, oh no, we care about academics and making sure that student gets their degree, and then on the other hand, you're firing a coach and then, you look inside the academics and some of the other disciplinary measures, and it's like, well, they did good there, and literally the only reason we're firing him is because he couldn't win? But you want to tell me that academics are important?
If you look at North Carolina and their recent academic fraud, misconduct, or whatever is going on there, where they're fake classes and people getting practically fake degrees, you ask their fan base what... Allegedly, of course.
Allegedly.
You ask their fan base what they care about, I don't think anyone cares at all. And that's just the perception that this entire country has crafted around college sports, and I don't think there's any way that's changing.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think that's because not only what is the fan base looking for, but what do they know? No one knows the average GPA of the football team. No one cares to know the average GPA of the football team or the basketball team. That's not what they came here to do. And in recruiting, when players are looking at schools, they're not picking a school to go play college football because they have a high GPA. That is not even on the radar. Players specifically that are coming to play, they want their star moment. They want to continue playing the sport that they love. And because it's what they love, the academics kind of slides to the back.
Yeah, and you look at Notre Dame, who just had 2 seasons of wins vacated because of academic misconduct. But people aren't talking about firing Brian Kelly because of those academic misconducts. They're talking about it because of his success that he's had in recent years.
Or
Now,
lack thereof.
yeah, exactly. Not really there. He should be gone, in my opinion, but moving on.
Speaking of firing coaches.
Yeah. But there are some coaches, I think maybe in basketball and college basketball, it might be a little bit more important. Just to bring it up, Tom Crean, for example, every senior that's played under Tom Crean at Marquette and here at Indiana, they've went on to graduate. It's been about 6 straight years where Indiana has been one of the top academic teams in the NCAA in terms of basketball. So there's less players there. You can focus more on the players because there's only about 15 players on a college basketball team. It's like sometimes like 90, maybe even 100 players on a college football team. I just don't think it's as important in college football. The success on the field is so much more there.
But you mentioned it even with college basketball and Indiana. You talk to Indiana basketball fans. Do you think they care?
Well, the fans don't care.
They don't care at all, and that's the perception that we've all crafted with college sports programs. Indiana basketball, all they talk about is when are they going to get past the Sweet 16? No one's going to say, why are seniors not graduating? No one's looking at that stuff, and it's frustrating.
But I think one thing that last week in the, or a couple of weeks ago in the press conference on Coach Wilson, one of the things that Athletic Director Fred Glass did say is, some things that might be okay at other schools, we're not necessarily going to allow them here at Indiana. And we're not going to sacrifice success on the field for success in other areas that we feel are important for our student athletes at this school. And I think because so many of the fans and so many of the outside perceptions of school, it is that, no one comes for the academics. I think as important as that may or may not be, it's so good that there is a school that says that, some sort of an administration. And that's where the change has to come in, is from the administrations, I think. And I think if a lot of other schools took that into consideration, there possibly would be some changes. I don't know. It depends on where we're going. Well, thanks for watching us this season. We will return in the spring. Be sure to follow us during the semester break through our Twitter account, IUSTV Sports, or by liking our Facebook page at IUSTV Sports. Send us any suggestions that you would like to see us toss up on the show. Until 2017, be proud and cheer loud. Have a great break.